All right, great to see everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. It is a 2040 in ramp terms. We're here to talk about super ICs and technical hiring. I'll probably maybe almost think about that as hiring for craft. Like with all advice, try it on, see if it fits. If it does, great. If not, no worries. But hopefully we will share a few lessons that have been helpful to us in building the company that we are today. With that, I also want to give an upfront notice that a lot of this will rhyme with some of the lessons that you heard about an hour ago. Because we count the days, we can also know what percentage of the time the company was with or without Keith. The answer is 98% of the days Keith has been involved. He's shaped the company deeply. I think it's been a big part of why we've been able to grow the way we have, and so we hope this is very useful for you. Like all things, a 30-minute talk is almost like a trailer, but the original, the movie, the source, the book, it's always better. These are some of actually the source materials that have taught us most of what we know. From the score takes care of itself, to high output management, how you're thinking through being a manager. John Wooden on leadership is incredible, insanely simple. It describes a lot of the unusual management practices that shape Apple. So there are great essays on Delian.io, and of course, David Senra's podcast, Founders, is just extraordinary. I really recommend these sources if you want to go deeper on some of the lessons, things you're hearing today. After internalizing all these sources, there is one consistent theme that keeps showing up, whether it's on hiring, on operating a company, on building great product, on pursuing things we could craft, and that is the theme of simplicity. At Ramp, simplicity is really at the heart of everything that we do. That lends to a simplicity of focus. Something that we talk about a lot inside of the company is our singular focus and our consistent mission. The rule at Ramp is everything we do, every service we offer, every product that we put out into the market has to meet one test, which is, does this save time or money for customers? If it does, we can ship it. If it doesn't, we don't. And so having simple rules for your company will clean a lot of things up. We also try to have an emphasis on simplicity in the products that we put out. We design our products to make very complex things very easy. What we're trying to do is streamline and abstract away a lot of the complexity of running a high-performing company. What we do mechanically is we integrate and rebundle often what are today disparate pieces of software into simple experiences. And so we're not trying to make easier to do with fewer step expense reports. We're trying to have expenses that do themselves, books that close themselves, money that finds its way to higher rate of return for your business. I think this is a little bit of where the world is going. Technology being sold as software you need to learn how to use, but actually technology that does work for you, selling work. But hopefully this gives you some context as well as about where some of this advice is coming from and how we're trying to apply it. And I think the closest analogy for just really, really day in, day out we're trying to do here at Ramp is this. These are the Raptor 1, 2, and 3 rockets at SpaceX. They follow a simple 5-step algorithm. Anybody can do it. Step 1, question every requirement. Step 2, delete any part of the process that you can. 3, simplify and optimize. 4, accelerate cycle times, go a little faster. And 5, automate. Notice that 5, the automation step is last. You do not automate first. You need to delete, get down to simple requirements before you do any of this stuff. And so we try to do that not just for our products, but a little more apt to what we're here to talk about today, simplicity and team. And so these are some of the rules that we follow to create high-performing teams here at Ramp. Welcome to the Art of Hiring at Ramp. And this came at a good time for us. The company is getting larger. I think in the coming weeks we will, both exciting but also a little scary for me, pass over 1,000 people here at the company. And I worry as we get bigger, do you become a victim of process? Do you become more mediocre? Does the blade of the knife get more dull? And does the next marginal person you hire actually make the company a little bit less effective? I think if you're thoughtful about things, we hope to be a little bit different. We're trying to fight that with every fiber of my being, of our being. And so these are some of the things that we do. At the core, I think one of the main and core ideas and beliefs that we have is if you find deeply talented, very spiky people who are very good at one thing, and you think hard about how to put them in roles where they can express that and give them tools, technology that augment and enhance that ability, you can create leverage. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is do that once, do that often, and replicate it in lots of aspects of our company. And so when we talk a lot about velocity, counting the days, we're trying to really think about what are the unique skills and how do we augment them consistently over time is a bit of the framework that's going on in the back of our minds. And to put a little bit more meat on the bone, if you were to kind of assess where are we spending the money, how are we actually hiring, one of the first things that'll jump out is about half of the funds that we spend actually go towards engineering, product design, data science, technical functions that are augmenting skills. In a lot of companies, these teams are just building user-facing or infrastructure products. A heavy portion of these teams are actually building tools for salespeople, for marketing, for design, for customer support, for talent, you name it. They are there to enhance the capabilities and the strengths of other teams. Next, we have a very high, and in some cases very unusual bar for talent. There are real Olympians who've worked at Ramp, some have medaled. There are math Olympians, it's probably real Olympians in some sense, but IOI, IMO, they're here. There are people really good at video games. Some just like it, but sometimes it's an early signal that there's something unusual going on in terms of someone's ability to focus and persevere. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But we try to find extremes and look for that and find signal. And then last, I think Keith emphasized this a lot, but I think it's really worth harping on. We hire for slope over intercept. The goal is not zero defects. Often we're finding maybe very weird, in some cases malformed. I have problems, other people have issues. There are roles in which I would fail and probably get fired at in Ramp if I were here. That is okay. You want to find people who are particularly spiky and on a steep slope, and we'll talk about what that means. We also unusually have a culture of seeking out ex-founders. Keith said this, that I'm not so, it's never fun when someone says, I think I'm ready to go and leave and start my own company. The day that I actually worry about is when that stops happening. It means we're no longer finding determined people who want to make things happen, who are going to wake up restless and try to move things forward. And so we actively try to be a place where we attract people who want to make a dent in the universe, want to create something worth creating. Give them resources, build teams around them, and hopefully we convince them of why the Ramp opportunity is exciting to stay for lots of years. And sometimes when they're ready to go, we want to do our very best to help support them and see them succeed as well. So this is probably a sum up of some of the characteristics. And done right, you can measure the outputs and the efficiency of people. And so I'll give you one example. Something that we measure very consistently is the productivity of sales development reps. This is one example. A sales development rep is sort of the starter role in sales. The quota for an average sales development rep at Ramp is 4 times that of our next closest competitor. Some of that is we try to find very talented, spiky individuals, folks who show promise in what they do. And we also have engineers, growth minds, folks in analytics who are trying to augment their capabilities, automate parts of the job so they can focus on where humans are uniquely great, and the rest if we can have automation, machines doing other aspects of their role. So this isn't just abstract concepts done correctly. You should be able to measure yourself and hopefully show higher efficiency on certain types of outputs that may be essential to how you grow and succeed as a company. All right. let's get into the good stuff and actually some of the practical rules. There's going to be 4 parts to this. The first is going to be before you hire, and an emphasis on super ICs, super individual contributors, craftspeople who sometimes manage other craftspeople. We'll talk about that, unpack that. Next, when you know you want to hire people, how do you think about various talent pools, where to look, and maybe find some unique alpha? We'll talk a bit about selection and assessment. And then last, what are some of the things that as things are starting to work and grow may change over time? And so, look, I think anyone, in their career wants to work for someone that they can learn things from. That is just like a truth. If you're early in your career, you want to work for other great people who will make you better. So you should look for people who are great at their craft, but often people forget this. I think a lot of times companies, when they get around to funding, they get the advice of, okay, you should hire this. They've seen the movie before, they've done it, they've been the VP of this, go bring them in, and they're gonna go and know how to do it. Maybe they know some things, but they don't want to get their hands dirty. There's some things that are unusual about Ramp. We very, very rarely hire managers directly to go into the company. We prefer finding people who have done the work, sold the deals, written the copy themselves, designed an interface, not just once, but continue to do that day in, day out. I still write copy. I still look at marketing collateral. I still will get involved in how things are designed. I think that's really helpful. It gives you a lot of taste and the ability to actually understand who are the people that you're going to need, what makes them great. And when they run into problems, you'll be able to better train them. And I think that not only allows you to hire better people, but also allows people who are working with you or for you to grow quickly and want to stay working with you. And so I wanted to start actually with just like a wonderful documentary. Some folks may have seen it. If not, you should watch it. It's 70-something minutes. It's about a guy named Jiro Ono. I think he turns 99 later this month. He is still most nights serving sushi in what was the first 3 Michelin star sushi restaurant in the world, and it's actually in the basement of a subway station in Tokyo. He's a pretty unusual guy. And I won't spoil the movie, but there's an amazing scene where the narrator essentially asks him, Jiro, what is your secret? How do you make such great sushi? And his answer is kind of deceivingly simple. He basically says, in order to make delicious food, you need to eat delicious food. Sounds kind of obvious. And he says the quality of ingredients is important, but one must develop a palate capable of discerning good and bad. Without good taste, you can't make good food. And if your sense of taste is lower than that of the customer, how is it that you will impress them? Then the guy goes off on some tangent about the guy he buys rice from, Hiromichi, and how he knows more about rice than anything. But it's actually, I think, a really profound moment that teaches you a lot about what it means to have a care of craft. And I think at almost 99, he's probably eaten more fish than probably any of us have ever met. He's still doing it. And I think the lesson is you don't start by making sushi. You start by tasting it. You need to continue to hone your craft. Sales is a craft. Design is a craft. Engineering is a craft. Great hiring is a craft. Before you try to go hire other people, you need to actually do it. You need to actually taste it. You need to have your own perspective on it. And so I think actually before you even hire, you should spend a lot of time up front really thinking through these types of thoughts. And I think if you hire people who are great at their craft, I think and hope they are going to create guilds, people who are dedicated to a certain way of thinking and excellence in something that they do. Name the fields, you name it. There is a highest level of standard that you can seek, and you can keep going and pushing the limits of that more than just a team. And I think doing that will change people's even relation with their job. I think when people have great taste, you can discern the difference between good ingredients, great ingredients. You understand when someone is a good designer. What does that mean mechanically? In what sense? In what context? I think discernment is very important, and I will agree with Keith's points earlier. Sometimes, great taste individually doesn't necessarily mean you have good taste in assessing others, but it's a good start because in really trying to hire someone to run and build your company, you're asking them to do a lot of complex set of tasks. I think without this element, you need more, but I think it's a foundational element of hiring and something you want to look for. I wanted to talk a little bit about person-problem matching. Hopefully, we're thinking, and before we let someone hire, hopefully they've worked for 3-4 months in your company. They have sufficient. They've demonstrated their ability to work as a craftsperson. They've shown the taste. They know a little bit of what they're looking for. They may say, "I want to go. We have this critical need. I need to open a JD or a job requisition." And I think one of the critical components before you even open roles is thinking about what unique spike do you need in a certain style of engineering and design. And I'll give you one example from Ramp. So in the early days, there were effectively 2 archetypes of engineers that worked at Ramp. When you think about Ramp, we issue credit cards. There's your payments. It's sort of like not really funny if your credit card, you swipe it and doesn't work. Like it has to work all the time. There's certain parts of our stack which need to have very low latency, very fast response time, very low tolerance for error. And you want to find perfectionists for these types of tasks. When we were, even thinking about where would we go out and look for, we wanted to think about what is the job they are going to do, and can we find people who obsess and have this specific qualities, not just the care of craft, but even the way they work, the way they think for those types of tasks. There's other elements of our product where the other archetype were people who could just learn really quickly and ship things daily, hourly. We get feedback from a customer within 10 minutes, it's fixed. They could be sloppy sometimes. And I think that's okay in certain contexts. There are some places where, if let's say you turn in a receipt and sometimes it takes half a second, other times because the queues are too long, it takes 10 seconds to match. That's not a huge deal as long as you're detecting it and you're responding quickly. And so there's going to be different analogies for this in lots of different contexts, but you want to be thinking about person-problem matching, not just are they good at the art of what they're doing, but what does the company need? What's the context of the services that they're going to be building? I think if you were to distill some, there may be other rules that you'll get into for certain jobs, but before you hire anyone, you'll want to check, have they done the work? Do they know the craft? Are they great at it? Is there a clear need, maybe a person-problem match? Does the person have good judgment and discernment? If you check all these boxes, only then maybe they're ready to hire, and you can proceed on to maybe the subject of the talk. How do we hire? I think this is a big one. I think this is especially true for pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B. It is probably still true even at Series D and above. People forget it sometimes when you have lots of money. But in the abstract, I think any company at its core, especially technology companies, they are not in the technology business. They are in the people business. The team you build is the company that you build. And in the world's most competitive market, which is the market for people, and you have very few dollars, how can you find people who are going to create a lot more value than what it costs maybe to pay them at the time? And we learned a lot from this book, or if you prefer the movie, that's fine too, Moneyball. It is based on a true story. It's quite good. Basically, the heart of it is Billy Beane becomes the general manager for the Oakland Athletics. They have a really tiny budget. They're losing, and he probably was going to get fired unless he could change things again because they're managing things for cost. And the status quo, the way people hired back then was they were looking for kind of sluggers and well-rounded players who were ready in any situations, and that's what scouts looked for. He took a different approach. He wanted to look for very specific stats that stacked together could lead to the outcomes that he wanted, which was a lot of runs. And he was looking just for that. And he found, people who could hit but couldn't catch. It was a very strange team, but being able effectively to assemble this, they were able to win a lot more than what you might expect and have their dollars go a lot further. So they'd find people with very specific and necessary spikes and would go after them pretty hard. So I'll give you a few tactics for what this can mean in practice. First, I recommend hiring aliens with extraordinary abilities. This is a photo of my co-founder, Kareem. Kareem is extraordinary. He was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon. There are a lot of things that make him a very special individual, but something I can tell you from going to college with him was he was one of the smartest people that could never get internships. Like companies just did not, they weren't built and well formed to be able to hire him. So maybe the first alien that we hired and had to figure out together was how can we actually work together and incorporate a company and navigate through that. And today at Ramp, I think that we've hired something on the order of 20 to 30 aliens with extraordinary abilities. Sometimes you go through an H-1B, sometimes you go through an O-1. But one of the unusual ways we are willing to compete is we will spend the time to actually find great people, sponsor visas, and that means that this excellent talent pool where there's not a lot of competition, unfortunately, we can find great people. Perhaps this will work for you. Spotting early talent. This is Calvin Lee. Sorry, this is so grainy. And this was in our original office apartment. We met Calvin when he was 18 years old. He was a high school dropout who went to MIT, and he wanted a winter 4-week internship as a college freshman. And I can tell you that is not a competitive market at all. No one is doing this. And there were certain things that were very special about Calvin. You didn't need to be a genius. You just needed to look at his resume in order to see this. Extraordinary capabilities in mathematics, extraordinary achievements. And I think had we waited a summer, we probably never would have been able to spend time with him. But he came over to Paribus, and we kept up with him. He later interned at Google Brain, Facebook AI research, and he was set to go to Citadel, and we said, how about working out of our living room instead? And luckily, he knew a couple things about us, and after some back and forth, agreed to come over. And he is an extraordinary person. I think he finished from MIT in 2.5 years with a 5.0. And what I would say is, if we waited to when most companies were trying to hire of the junior internship or is that it's priced in. There's enough context about. But if you start getting to know, you can form deeper relationships. And so I'd say for startups, I know, Z fellows, there's other folks in the audience who are a lot younger, spend time with these types of people. I think it goes a very, very long way. And you can find some unique advantages. And we try to do this too. And so we'll offer winter internships, fall, spring, meeting people early and investing in genuine relationships is another way. That you can compete in mispriced talent pools. Black sheep. Let's talk about this one. It's a little bit personal for me. My older brother has Asperger's. He has learning disabilities, and I remember as a kid, your older brother is your hero in a lot of ways. And as you would get older and kind of go through standard school, things got really hard for him because he did not fit in the traditional way that people learn. And so I couldn't quite understand as a kid, for someone who had the most unbelievable memory, could tell you, within an instant if you asked him what was going on, and year 421 BC in this part of the world could go right into it. He had extreme spikes, but frankly really struggled to go through high school. And I always just remembered thinking that in certain contexts he could really thrive. There are things that he could do really well, and I think happily, in many ways, he's found that his parents have cared about that, and we've been fortunate to be able to work through that. And what I'd say is there are many people with stories like him. there's an extraordinary engineer here who has autism. He went to community college. It's not a very obvious resume, but there were certain things about him. He was very well known in the Minecraft community. He had built extraordinary things. If you actually kind of assessed, and again, not a lot of people are looking in the Minecraft pool of who has created kind of successful private servers, but there were signals that there was an extraordinary kind of talent, which was very relevant when you're building very complex databases. You need extreme attention to detail, where his skill sets was very extraordinary. You're going to find other versions of this, contrarians, people with things that make them less obvious, but you want to look for that because sometimes you can find really extraordinary people who can create a unique culture for you. High taste, or as I was putting this together, people with a lot of hair. Was what I wondered. So some people have seen this interview, but I thought it was actually just like excellent. Anderson Cooper was interviewing Rick Rubin, wrote a great book called The Creative Act. And he says, do you know how to work a soundboard? He's a producer. He says, no, I have no technical ability. I know nothing about music. And Anderson asked him, you must know something. Well, and this is what I loved. I know what I like and what I don't like. And I'm decisive about what I like and what I don't like. What are you being paid for? It is the confidence in my taste and my ability to express what I feel has proven helpful for many artists. I think as a small startup or even a company scaling, you need to be fairly opinionated in the products that you make. What you put out in the world, you need to be distinct in order to stand out in a very busy world. And a lot of people are good generalists. They can handle lots of situations. It's much rarer to find people with particular opinions, people who've created a certain craft. And I think in early hires, you want to be looking for people who have very specific, sometimes stubborn, but certain views about the world. To make it more real, Diego, who also has a lot of hair, is our now VP of design. We couldn't hire him originally, but we could convince him to be an advisor for a couple times, a couple hours a week. He'd think about it, give feedback to our junior designer at the time about what was getting built. Week after week after week, slowly he was waking up and actually kind of falling in love with the work he was doing in his spare time. And not only could we find someone with taste, but eventually we were able to, I don't know if seduce is the right word, but convince him to come over to Ramp. And so I would say early on, you want to find people with a very distinct and particular point of view, looking for that. And there's ways you can find. Vintages and lineages, I think is an important thing. Sometimes you say, okay, great, we're ready to scale. We need to hire great salespeople, or we need amazing design. And people say, okay, awesome. Let's sales, who has great sales? Let's go to Salesforce, or let's go to Rippling. And I sort of think about this, it's easier to explain almost in basketball terms. Like if you wanted to hire and recruit and someone who is amazing at basketball, recruiting from the 90s Chicago Bulls in the 1990s, that you couldn't do better. Like that was an amazing team. Recruiting from the Chicago Bulls in the 2010s, might be fine. But it's a little bit tougher. It's not quite the same caliber of team. And yet people say stuff like this all the time. They're like, oh yeah, this company, they know sales. This company, you got to hire a marketing person from them. All right. And so you want to think not just about who is great at the craft of what they're doing, but what was the period to even what was getting done. Often I find people who are excellent at building a function versus operating a function once it's at scale are very, very different. And so matter the function, I do recommend looking at companies and studying and being a student of what made other companies excellent at what they do. But you want to dig a little bit deeper into, was this the person who created this extraordinary function, who earned that reputation? Was this the right time period? Go one layer deeper than people often do. Often a lot of people can make mistakes on this. I will also argue there is a hard negative. There is a counter to this, which is I'll pick on one of our favorite neighbors. Across the street from our office is Figma. I think Figma is no doubt an extraordinary company. And they might even have world-class salespeople, but I have no ability to figure that out. I don't know, right? The product is so good. I actually think you could be the best in the world salesperson, or you could be totally fine. And a lot of times, people will go and try to find sales talent, maybe at the companies with extraordinary, product, engineering, whatever cultures. One of the best early salespeople that we ever hired was Max. Max is still with the company. He went back from being an AE to being an SDR and started the function here at Ramp. And something that really caught my attention was not only was he the top of his leaderboard, but he was doing it at Namely. And Namely was a really interesting company for me because they had scaled from something like 0 to, $70, $80 million in revenue in a very compressed period of time, 3-4 years, something fast. And the most surprising thing was they had an NPS of negative 40. And they're like, wow, how did they do that? How did they sell something that people actually hated? That's got to be a good salesperson. And so there are certain functions where actually selecting for good lineages will lead you totally astray. And so if you can find someone who can sell a product that doesn't work great, and bring them to a place that actually has extraordinary products that works great, just do that. That's really good. All right. So we've thought about different pools. We're selecting from some places that were advantaged. We know some rules. We know what to look for. And we're starting to get people into the building. How do we think about assessing talent? So let's talk a bit more about spikes. And so first, I think it's worth stating one of the basics, which is if you look at most job descriptions for most jobs in America, there's like a lot of requirements. 3 to 7 years of experience, has done this, 10 other things. It's very like yes and jazzy. People can add things, and it sounds fun when you're doing the job description. But actually, what you're doing is with every new requirement, you're narrowing and narrowing and narrowing and narrowing and dividing and dividing. Whereas you could have thought about, and the world of people that could have met the things that actually matter to your business could have been tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and maybe you've narrowed it down with this long checklist to maybe like 5, which probably raises your price, and so you're not getting an advantage in that. I think as a startup and early on, to the extent you can, remember the lesson of simplicity. There should be one thing that you're looking for. Maybe 2, but probably 1. If you are looking just for one particular thing, you can look a lot more broadly. You're going to be better able to assess spikes, and you will more quickly be able to discern is someone truly world-class, and you can compare at one vector that really matters for your business. And so practically what I would take away from this is you should write unreasonably short job descriptions and know exactly what you're looking for, and make it easy to assess someone's performance on one metric first. Again, this is advice really for ICs. You'll turn into managers later, but I think it's a good way of hiring. Let's talk about slope over intercept. So this is a way to visualize it. I think we've been talking about this in different iterations, but if someone has a lot of years of experience, maybe they're more akin, and the point of time is today, to this blue line. They can create more value, and it's more known and it's priced in, versus like the 18-year-old freshman intern is like here. And maybe that intern is on a really steep slope, but what you want to be doing is hiring people that are closer to the red line. You want to find people early in their career. You want to look for particular spikes. Were they great at a video game? Did they win some competition? Is there something unusual? When you go deep, you actually can find something very unusual and go and try to find that. So look for slope over intercept every time. When you're interviewing people, things should be rangy. Disregard some of the text, but a lot of times what happens, let's say you meet someone, you're looking for someone in engineering, and you set up an interview with like the 6 other people at the company. What happens at a lot of companies is there's 6 different interviews, and everyone kind of asks variations of the same thing. Tell me about your background. Tell me about a project that you're particularly proud of. you can go deep into something technical. And if you kind of look at the actual time spent, and maybe half of the questions were actually the same thing, and you keep on getting measurement of the same note. And maybe you all like the note, but why'd you have 6 interviews? You might as well have had like 2. What's 3? When you think about interviews mechanically, you actually want to construct them to be eliciting very different signals and very different responses. So to give you an example, in certain functions, you may not know this up front, but if, let's say, you're interviewing for something at Ramp, one of those interviews may actually be designed to debate you on something, find something you say and just disagree with you on it. And the goal of that is actually to pick up one particular signal, which is if you have a bunch of determined, stubborn, black, sheepish, very individual people, you are almost certainly going to get into a debate. How is someone going to handle that and some of the pressure? You want someone who's looking particularly at what people want out of life and out of their career. Maybe you want to actually see work product and work on things with people. The point is you can design different types of interviews, but if there's certain things, not just in their craft, but also in the context of working with others, if there's specific signals you are trying to pick up, be very intentional in the design of your interview process. Strong yes or bust. I think this is really important. I think one of the most common outcomes for interviews is you have 6, maybe they're really good, and you ask, what'd you think? So we have basically 4 grades you can give people. Strong no, yes, or strong yes. And often with people who are kind of good, it's like, I like them, yes. And you get to the end and it's 6 yeses. And at Ramp, that is a no. You want someone who is going to pound the table and say, I'm going to go and make this person successful, particularly if they're the hiring manager. And I even think if you have a strong yes from the right person, that can overwhelm even no's and other conditions, because it's someone saying, I am running this function, I'm leading this craft, and I'm telling you, and I will put myself on the line to make this person successful. I think, again, in looking for convictions and certain spikes, you want to be looking for very strong yeses. Otherwise, keep waiting, passing. You want people with deep taste, spikes, capabilities. And last, what would I say? You might even be able to disregard almost everything we just talked about, which is to observe the following. Let's say that you have like an unreasonable set of interviews and you spend like 8 hours with a candidate. That's like a lot of time. You do the dinner, you do all the meetings, you have the retro, and you say, okay, great, let's hire them. Within 2 business days, or maybe 1 at certain companies, you will have more information about what it is actually like to work with that person than in your entire interview process. And most people aren't that good at interviews yet. And so probably my top piece of advice, which probably relates to what PayPal did in the early days, what Facebook did, what Airbnb, what a lot of companies with without a lot of resources do, which is hire based on referrals. You have some asymmetric information. You or someone you've worked with or know or get advice from has worked with, observed, built things with someone for many years, and you're gonna get a lot more signal. Maybe you never see them do the job, but you can know a lot of things about people. And so you can build a great interview process, but you're better off just trying to use long-term information about people if you can. Okay, last things I'll fly through. What changes as you scale? And you want to look out for, and this is again probably more relevant as you start to get up there in terms of number of people. The first thing that you want to do consistently is this exercise of core sampling. This often comes fields where you're studying the earth. You want to kind of drill down. Maybe you do a first interview and you get a certain degree of signal, but if you keep asking the same question, you go deeper on it, you start seeing the depth that someone can speak at. You want to do similar things with your orgs. And so sometimes this shows up inside of organizations as you don't do one-on-ones just with someone who reports to you, but their skip level, you go down deep into the source to actually see, are things behaving as you expect? You want to be going deep into your organization to ensure that the assumptions that you're making in scaling with other people over time are playing out in the way that you actually anticipated. You cannot not do this. There's something that we learned from Facebook that probably saved the company from going off a bit of a cliff at one point. It got to the point where we were growing quickly enough. We were adding like 100, 200 people a year, and I was no longer meeting everybody. I was looking at one of the recommendations. An offer was about to go out where there was all kinds of red flags, all types of issues, and someone was going to go. And we made all sorts of mistakes. Someone who joined like a month ago was hiring someone really quickly, all kinds of stuff. I had learned this story from Facebook where Mark for a long time did interview everyone, but at some point it changed. And effectively, the story is they created effectively a Zuck review, I think up through 2,000 people. Prior to the approval of any packet, the hiring managers, people who want to go and bring someone in, would bring it, Mark would review it, they talk about it live, and sign it off. At the beginning, I think it was pretty bumpy. People who are new to the company were wondering, but effectively you're training, you're continuing to show what it is you want people to know about the company, and you're able to kind of quality assurance and scale yourself. And we've introduced this at Ramp when we were a few hundred people. We still do this today, where before we hire anyone, I do, Kareem does, Colin does, must all sign off on a person. And that's really effective so that as you're scaling, one, not only does it mean for someone hiring, the founders personally are saying, yes, I want you to have this person, I'm excited about this, but it's also effective for closing too. They can go to the candidate and say, the founders want you here. They looked at it and excited. When you meet them on the first day, you'll know something about them as well. And so if you can interview people for as long as you can, if you can't do that, there are other ways to continue to scale that. And last, as you're now starting to build whole departments and functions, there's different algorithms that you might follow for individual ones. For go-to-market, it's often payback period associated is someone costs this, they're able to return this. You can go and measure over time, 3 months, 6 months out, are the bets that you're making actually playing out? If not, you can sort of meter how you hire. G&A, I'm general administrative, that's me too. We need to go down as a percentage of expenses as the company grows. And so you want to grow sublinearly in terms of how the company and R&D. You can assess things. Often the output of those organizations takes places over many years versus like a single quarter. And so you often want to be looking at input metrics, productivity, and throughput metrics in order to assess will the marginal hire continue to slow things down or actually allow us to speed up and take new bets that we couldn't before. Follow some simple algorithms and you'll be able to hire at scale. Last things I'll say, I hope this was a useful crash course into some of how we think about hiring at Ramp. To the extent you know anyone, we're also hiring too. This is my shameless plug. We have 60 open roles. Come talk to us. And if you're, here listening to this, you might be the high slow person we're looking for. My social media team wanted to put this one on there. I like this a lot. We work above a Home Depot, which is pretty weird and interesting and has its own perks. But look, I hope this was useful. It has been a ton of fun building this company over the past few years. And with that, wanted to open things up for Q&A.
Hey, Victor here from Ava. My question is, how soon did you hire a recruiter on the team, and what was the decision behind that?
Yeah. This is probably one of the more dangerous pieces of advice I'll give. Very early in the context of Ramp, I think that we were 4 to 5 months old at the time that we hired our first recruiter. I think it was our 9th or 10th hire at the company. And so it was like 7 engineers, 1 designer, me, and then this talent person. And I think the specific reason that we did that was we knew exactly like what were the specific experiments we were trying to run, how to de-risk it. And we were investing ahead pretty quickly in building the capacity in order to scale aspects of kind of Ramp's engineering team. And what we really were looking wasn't for like a head of people or HR. A lot of people who want to be the first often want to do that. It was very specific. We want to find someone who is really excellent at recruiting and hunting. I think it comes from kind of the notion of really excellent people often aren't looking. Sometimes they are, but they're building great products. They're companies are trying to keep them around, and so the intention was to have a lot more at bats, see a lot of people. In certain cases where I didn't know the function well, it was to try to develop taste and discernment, to meet lots of people over time, see what good looks like. But it was meant to really expand the pool that we were seeing, so that hopefully we could discern a little better. But it was very early. I think if it's your first go around at companies, I usually would recommend probably closer in the 20s to 30s. Going a little bit slower is probably more correct, but that's at least how we thought about things. Yeah.
I think very impressive. Other than Roberto from Sailor.
Yeah.
Other like the talent density at Ramp is that actually a couple of friends, both Jacobs, they work at Ramp too, and progressively they've been here for a while. So one thing would be intriguing to hear like Ramp's principles on talent retention.
Yeah. I mean, so first, there are a lot of companies that they have an effective function and they hire people above. That may be, if you fully embrace that, an effective way of building a company. I don't know how to do it. I think I'm probably pretty ineffective at it. A lot of what we try to do is find people who are really talented and then just keep stretching and stretching and stretching. Either giving them more responsibilities or saying, I'm going to give you, I want you to hire this person, lead this function. Since you mentioned the, Jacob, and Jacob by name, I'll even talk about one. I mean, Jacob was, prior to coming to Ramp, a startup founder, had built something great, wanted to see things at the next set of scale, and actually came into our operations team. It was supposed to be business operations. He ended up working in risk operations and underwriting really quickly. And we could tell whatever we gave him, he was fast, he was clear, and people were constantly going over to Jacob to learn things from him. And I think one of the most important parts at that juncture in our company's history, I think Jacob was probably about 9 months, a year in role, was how do we scale our people and recruiting function. And so what we did is we actually say, hey, I know you've never spent time on recruiting, but this is a really tough problem. I'm going to throw you in. We're going to give you some resources. Can you go and do that? And I think that I think the first time I asked him to do it, he was like, looked at me like I had a hole in my head and like, what do you mean you're asking me to go do this? But he got into it, he fell in love with it, spending a lot of time with people in and around the company, some like Keith, others like outside, board advisors, mentors, people who are great at hiring. And I think if you take really smart people who are capable and just continue to stretch them, I think that gives you a shot at keeping people who, like in the case of Jacob, could go leave and start his own company, could go do other interesting things. And so I think probably the thing to remember and that I would try to internalize for everyone here, for employees, is in some sense, like everyone is the hero of their own story, right? They're moving towards some goal. And I think as a startup founder, it's really easy to think about like, what does my company need and just optimize only for that. Spend a little bit of time thinking about like who are these people, what's going to be important, maybe skills, things to pick up, opportunities that may help them, whether it's at Ramp or in the future. And when you can find the intersection of both, I think often it leads to people who want to stay, who are growing constantly. And if we do our job right, hopefully convinced to stay as long as possible. So hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course, yeah.
As a company grows, does your rubric change if you're hiring an executive?
So as the company grows, does your rubric change if you are hiring an executive? Was the question. I think it was a great one. So I will admit, I am not great at hiring executives. I think there's probably some saying something like, if you were world class at hiring executives, you have a 50% hit rate. I don't even know if I'm there. I'm probably not. And so, for better or for worse, a bit of the ramp way is we try to find people who are like super ICs, people who are great at the craft and stretch them. Like one example of someone who joined very early was someone named Nick Koblov. Nick joined, he was the VP of engineering at a firm. And he joined Ramp when we were 15 people. And what was unusual about it is you said, look, if done right in 3 months, here's the team, here's how it's going to look, but you're going to be an IC actually for the first 3 months. And a lot of people would say no. He was really into it. He really liked it. And so I think we probably miss out at times, and we constrain the set of people that we can work with because we are so stubborn on actually, if you're going to lead set of craftspeople at doing something, like you need to earn their respect, their admiration, show them how it's done, so they'll want to follow you into battle. And a lot of people just simply have said, I've done too much in my career to put up with this and opt out. But sometimes you find people who opt into it. And so it is not the only way. I think there's probably great techniques to assess. But I'll just say mea culpa. I actually am probably not the person you want to ask about that question, but it's a good one.
Hello, this is Mithat from Flora. So I'm originally from Turkey, and you mentioned about extraordinary aliens, and I went ahead and actually started hiring from Turkey, and at like 30% of the cost of the people here, like very talented people, like from top companies, from top schools. And what's your perspective to that? Like building a global remote team versus like building together?
Yeah. I think it can be, I actually think that's a great thing that people can do. And I would probably venture to say your ability to assess talent from Turkey is far above mine and far above most people in this room. And that probably generates alpha for you. And I think that's a very good thing. If the core thing you were trying to do is find people who are capable of creating a lot more value than maybe it costs, and hopefully you can pay them more and they can participate in the upside and all that, I actually think that's a win-win for everybody. And so what I'd say is I think it is underused as a technique. I think the world, like things like Zoom, the digitization of work generally has brought the world a lot closer. And I actually think it's a very good thing to be doing. And I hope it sounds like it's working very well for you. Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Eric.
Oh, you have a mic coming.
One thing that I find really interesting about Ramp is that you are very outwardly pro black sheep, aliens, like finding people on the fringes who have very high tastes. I imagine that leads to more conflict in an org than at most orgs. And I'm just curious, do you strive for consensus or do you strive for disagree and commit? Or like, how do you deal with a lot of high taste, high conviction folks in one room?
Oh my gosh. I love the question. Look, I think one of the greats, if you listen to Founders Podcast, David Senner often talks about David Ogilvy quite a bit. And he has this very short, but I think extraordinary quote, which is, tolerate genius. People who are particularly good are stubborn. They're a little bit out there, hard to deal with. But there's a reason that you tolerate it because often it can lead to unique, interesting, extraordinary thoughts. And that is definitely the way that we lean as an organization. What I would add to it is that if you're hiring black sheep, founder types, out there kind of people, you can be certain, especially if they're determined, you're going to have fights on your hands. And I think actually not everyone does this the same way, but I'll tell you like what I often look for and try to emphasize is the goal is not to outsmart the other person. This isn't a philosophy class. You're not trying to win a debate. The goal is to uplift and get there together faster, done right. Hopefully iron will sharpen iron. Two opposing thoughts will actually help each other get to the truth. You need to have a fairly low ego environment to separate your own views, yourself from the position and thought you're taking. And while it's hard, and at times you're going to need to just like referee certain things. I think it actually leads to more empowering cultures. It means, done right, best ideas can come from anywhere. I don't care who's the boss of some department. Best ideas should win. And I think often that attracts deeper thinkers. So we don't always get it right, but that's how we lean.